I thought that I would talk about just going back to the beginning, how both of you met Russell. I mean, we talked a little bit about it last night, but if you could tell people how it was that you ended up in Boston and ended up meeting Louise there.
I spent about a year in Boston. I was an artist. I was lived in Beacon Hill, and was wandering around one night, sat down on the step, and Louise walked by. He had just recently, within the past few months, arrived from Buenos Aires. He was studying at MIT, and anyway, he walked by, looked at me, stopped, turned around, looked at me. I said hello, and he sat down and talked for an hour or so, and he was leaving for Buenos Aires the next day. He got his phone number, and when he got back about a month later, we got together, and we worked together for about 15 years without too many problems, with no intermissions whatsoever.
And you ended up moving shortly.
So when I was there, I was working in the ceramics department at MIT, and also at the advanced visual studies department where Louise was working. And we were there for about a year, and then we moved together to New York and got a loft on Duane and Elk Street. And that's where we worked. We had 3 floors. I had floor number 4, he had number 3, and we had, or he was on 3, I was on 5, he was in the middle. In the middle was a kitchen and that sort of thing. It was all illegal the way everything else was in those days. And we worked and accomplished a lot. And that's where we lived when Louise met David. I'm not sure where he met David. I met David just before the pier. We worked a lot in the pier, and David stopped by with all the paint, and we went over there together, and after that, we were friends.
And that was when Louise met David also?
Louise had met David sometime before. I'm not sure where the two of them met, but it probably had to do with, it was sometime before Hal had his show here called Climbing. I don't know what year that was, 1983, I think.
2 or 3, yes.
It was early. 83, I would think, maybe.
Judy was in the show too.
Yeah.
And, but David and I really got to know each other after we worked together on the Deer project.
And Judy?
What was the question?
Well, the question was, well, actually, I want to know how you met David. I mean, I know you both showed at Civilian Warfare together. But you showed first at Fashion Moda. You were an Uptown girl.
I had I always tell my students this because it was kind of a lesson. I had sent my slides to Hal, and I also was having a show at Fashion Moda, and I took a little painting to, at that point, the Xerox shop, and I made a little card, my own card. And the same day that I got the envelope with the form letter saying, like, thank you very much, like in the Salvage Stand envelope, Hal called me, and it was for the climbing show, and that's how I became a part of the East Village.
Wow. How?
Yeah, Hal.
It's all because of you. Well, we knew that anyway. But yes. And Hal was, Russell's gallery for years, and it continues to be.
Yeah. How many people were in the climbing show? 12, 13, 14?
Bobby, yeah.
Hal, do you remember?
Yeah, it was more than that.
Yeah, there were a lot.
A big group.
And all of those, I looked at the card, all of those names are still like the major, you have a great eye, because it's still like the major people that you think of when you think of the East Village. And that was like super early, that was the beginning.
Well,
so that's where you met,
I met Louise, and Louise said to me, come to the pier. So it all happened at the same time. And that's when I went to the pier. And the Fashion Moda show, Dean had gone to the Fashion Motor Show, so I started, it was all happened almost like in the same, very, very close in time.
Right.
And then just went down to, and that's when I met everybody, was down at the pier.
Well, I mean, I think what people don't realize who weren't around at that time is that things were so spontaneous. I mean, you could come up with an idea for a show that was going to happen in 3 weeks, and everybody would, if it was a theme show, the artist would make work that would fit into that show, or they, whatever, and the shows would happen. Or you would see somebody's slides, or go and see someone's work and ask them to do a one-person show in 2 weeks, or because it wasn't in those days, we weren't thinking about getting out mailings, there were no websites, or any of that. It was just like this kind
I'm
of
sure somebody
spontaneous.
was less spontaneous, you know what I mean? I think it was in nature.
That was just me?
No, but that was East Village.
That was the East Village. That's what I'm saying. At that time, there was just so much, it's perfect how you explained what happened to you. I mean, all those things was like a convergence.
Right.
Like when I opened my gallery, it's like almost simultaneously nature mort, civilian warfare, maybe new math.
Fun.
Huh? Fun was a little earlier. And all these galleries, we didn't know each other, and we all opened within blocks of each other. So it was this zeitgeist of things that were going on.
And whenever there was a show, even if people didn't send out invitations, you would tell one person, the word would get around so quickly because everybody knew so many people. There was a good word of mouth system. So the shows in the East Village were almost always very crowded, no matter what. And Limbo, I think the Limbo Lounge had quite a bit to do with it too, with introducing artists. They would have a show every week. I think they would show a different artist. So we would put together.
Didn't they one time do a different artist every day or something? It was nuts. They were completely nuts.
But I mean, it was like the real estate, there was opportunity too, you know what I mean? You found each other because you all found a spot that it was possible to do that.
Right, and there was, it was a sense of community between the critics were all, the critics, the artists, and the gallery owners were all one big, group. So if you would, somebody came, you would say, oh, you have to see, Judy's show at, down there, or you have to, and everybody went to everybody, like you said, everybody's opening.
But it was generated around working.
Yeah, and there was an awful lot of freedom. These spaces were usually not pristine, and the gallery owners were very flexible, and the artists were as well, and we would manage to put together some very interesting shows very quickly with the boundaries were who knows where. But,
Well, in the very early East Village, I went down and David was putting together these, I think the door was closed and he was moving those things in as people were standing outside waiting for that show to open. That was
Oh, what, the heads?
Yeah.
Well, the story about the heads was that, I love that photo. Is that Andre Sturze's photograph, maybe?
yeah, I think so.
The story about the heads is I heard that he installed them, they installed them the night before, and David showed up the next day whenever they woke up and opened the gallery door, and they had all fallen off the walls because there was the little shelves that they had put were not, those things stupidly are solid plaster. They weigh a friggin' ton. But because of that also, I guess nothing got damaged.
I think there was some last minute.
Oh, there was?
As I remember.
So it doesn't have the date of actually.
Yeah, so that's the same time, and I think 83 must be the time.
All of these old posters have the month and the day, but never the year.
You need a very tall, Philip, you could come and look at up here at the, Hal must know, do you know what the date is on there?
Well, that was a civilian warfare show.
Yeah, but around that time, you must know.
I want to go back to Gracie's, I don't mean to interrupt rudely, but the question of when Russell met David, because I thought it was when David came back from Paris, which would have been earlier than 1983 or 4.
It could have been.
Oh, here we go.
I'm very vague about my sense of time back then. But I met everyone right around, 82, 83, 84. I moved to the city we moved in 1976 from Boston, and I met a lot of people very quickly. It seems like I met everyone at the same time.
Hmm?
So
The only people that I know that knew David in the late 70s were Gene and Dirk. I didn't know him. I mean, I was introduced to his work with that public illumination gallery show that he did. And then seeing like the burning houses and stuff on the street. And he was already known, David was known to me before, like pretty much as soon as I moved to New York in 1980. I mean, he was like, he was already like a big
He sent me a
star.
postcard from Berlin, and I guess he was 82, so I must have known him. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's the postcard that's here?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So 82 sounds right. So Judy, you actually, so you went to the Piers and you got close with David then.
I was a gallery, I was an acquaintance kind of thing. When we were in the gallery together, I remember one time, and David was always kind of around, but he was very quiet. I mean, he was not like the life of the party kind of person.
Right.
So I knew him, and I remember sitting with him once in that car. He had the blue station wagon with all the little teeny animals on the dashboard. And we had a really nice talk. I didn't really get to know him really until we went to Louisville, Kentucky together.
Oh, yeah.
And in my memory, we stayed in the same room together, and that's how we really got to know him. And it was just after that he was diagnosed. So
that was a really bonding experience for a lot. Who else was
I
there?
think Marilyn Hunter was there. Didn't you tell me that?
Oh, this was
The
the
missing
show.
person show.
This was the show where a bunch of artists went down. David West, you, David Wojnarowicz, maybe James Romberger. Yeah, James and Marguerite maybe were there.
Baby.
Huh? And the baby.
With their baby, insurance babies.
And Marilyn and Christoph. And Marilyn and everybody went and they had to paint and do the installation live there, and then it was going to open up to a show. And this was all a fine idea, except that Christoph and Marilyn needed a projector to do their work. So the place had to be black, right? Exactly, so they could see what their projector was. So from what I understand, everybody is, and I saw Tessa's film, everybody is working in the dark so that they can, do their piece with the
They were also
projector.
tripping on LSD.
Oh, they were tripping the whole time, that's right.
When I first showed him,
No, Marilyn was the only one that wasn't.
Yeah, Marilyn that was her first foray into sobriety.
when I did the Fashion Motor Show, it was with Encino, and everything was phosphorescent paint. So you had to turn off the lights all the time to see what it was.
So I know that you collaborated with David on his show at the New Museum.
I didn't collaborate with David. I was very poor, and David very nicely hired me. And it was the worst relationship. It was just terrible. I was the worst assistant in the world. It was we were mismanaged, and everything he told me to do, I did wrong. I tried to build those little houses. They were terribly rickety, and like everything. David was very meticulous. We were not in sync. I never collaborated. I mean, David was a wonderful collaborator.
I mean, he collaborated with a lot of artists. I mean, he did that series with Marian Mama and
Kiki.
And Kiki. Yeah.
He loved it. I think he was a great collaborator, but it just wasn't the. Did you ever do anything with him?
No.
He did with Luis, of course. Obviously, we're here at this show. He collaborated with Luis on things.
I think he loved to collaborate. I think he really enjoyed it.
And he dedicated a lot of things to people, which was nice. But she was saying that when you did the thing at the New Museum, he said, go out and get extension cords.
Well, I went out and got extension cords that were black. And that actually, when I think about it now, how stupid could you be? I mean, it's a white wall and you're trying to hide it. So I really was terrible. Don't hire me as an assistant. And I'm not meticulous, he was pretty, but the other thing that even, I don't know if it was Cindy was saying it yesterday, but when I worked with David, so he had a deadline, And he just sat at his kitchen table smoking cigarettes. And I was sitting with him because I was his hired person, but we just sat there. And I'm getting more anxious I'm not that kind of, I'm not good at sitting still and waiting for the thing. And then when he was ready, it was fully formed. And that's the way he always was. You know what I mean? There was a kind of a clarity. It came out totally complex. But for me, it was also temperament-wise, it was different.
Was he making sketches of what he was going to do?
Nothing. It was just very slowly, you know, that was...
It's interesting because that insight into how he worked, because when he wrote, things just came out like fully formed. Like
When
his
he wrote.
editors, when he wrote, his editors said there was like no crossing things out, no anything. It was just like,
He spoke like that.
yeah, like Ken Kesey, you know, or not Ken Kesey.
On the road.
Yeah,
Jack Harrell.
Jack Kerouac wrote it all, you know, like in a scroll of paper. Yeah.
That's the way he painted too, right? I mean, that's the way David painted as well. I mean, it just came out. He didn't spend time doing sketches or studies and trying to figure out. It appeared suddenly.
But when
And I think he waited till the last, he was like very, you know, waited until the last,
Procrastinating.
yeah, he's a very big procrastinator. I mean, Sir will tell you when we did that show, when he was in the small back room and Stephen Lack was in the front, and he did that installation, it was not the opening, people were like mobbed outside to get in, and he was still putting it together, and he wouldn't let us open the doors. Stephen was furious.
He
Yeah.
didn't get
It's like
that, did he? He had a lot of patience, really. David, did you see him? Well, he probably did explode with you, but not with most people. I mean, he
David?
had a lot of
Patience. I think he was, I think he had a lot of different things. It wasn't that he was being patient, he was
No.
receiving the information. I mean, it was almost like a kind of a, you know what I mean, like that.
Yeah, well, he was impatient with a lot of things, at least political, because when we were together, normally he would go on to a political rant, and he was angry about many things, and he was an activist, so I think he had that on his mind a lot, along with his work, but he spoke very clearly, articulately about the problems with government as related to the HIV epidemic at the time when it happened. And he was very articulate and spontaneous and right on.
But his earlier work, you know, was political or pointed in a different way. It was, you know, after he became diagnosed and after, then, I mean, there was we didn't know about HIV before 1985.
But David talked
Right.
a lot about invisibility and not seeing your gay image reflected in the world, and that was a political thing of his even before, you know, that was important. I think he had like that kind
Yeah,
of...
definitely the gay thing. One day this boy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me be seen, you know, that how you make an image of something makes it, you know, mirrors you, and then it lets you feel, you know, accepted. But, yeah, I always think of David as being somebody who had almost like zero tolerance for anything, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, that was the beauty of it, but that's the politics of it. He couldn't negotiate, it was hard for him to negotiate a kind of an acceptance of some things because he really had, you know, injustice, whatever, he had no tolerance for.
And he involved himself in the solution. I mean, he didn't just rant, he saw a solution in his mind and he articulated that as well. He wasn't whining, he was seeing a problem that was obvious and articulating a solution to the problem, throwing it out. And I think he got a lot of media. I know he was interviewed a lot and created a few scandals.
He liked that, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, he didn't suffer fools gladly, is that the term? I mean, he would like go off on people. It was kind of scary. And I once, you know, you sort of felt that when you were around him, that he was like wound, you know, up about things. And I once said to him, you know, the wrong thing. I said to him, sometimes I just feel like I'm walking on eggs with you, you know? And that really made him blow up. He had never really blown up at me before that, but then he like really, you know, like, how can you? Like,
And all the eggs cracked.
and all the eggs cracked, exactly. Yeah.
But it came up yesterday, and I think it's true that there is, even in terms of what is the proactive, what would he do about things, was humor. I mean, I think that, you know, counteracting that thing which was there, like, you know,
Yes,
it's just
it's,
what he,
it's satire. I mean, his books, I mean, they were hilariously funny, but very dark. When, you know, the readings the other day at the museum, one of the senators lays an egg, and the egg hatches on the Senate floor, and the flag comes out, and everybody starts, someone appears singing Star Spangled Banner. And it's like Burroughs, sort of William Burroughs-esque. I mean, funny, but really very serious at the same time. Allegory.
Well, he really looked up to Burroughs, and in fact, his first book, Sounds in the Distance, has a blurb on the back from William Burroughs. And I was like, so, I mean, here I am, like moving to the East Village, like it was like such a beginning stage for everybody, and except for this guy who had a book with a, you know, blurb from William Burroughs on it. Just very impressed.
I mean, that thing he says about I'm a 10,000 pound, I mean, that is the feel, you know, that is the eggshell.
That is, right.
I wonder if I remember when he did, he knew Dennis, is it Dennis Cooper, Dennis, the writer, and that's who I wondered if he was connected to Burroughs. Dennis.
Oh, could have been.
What
Well,
was
Little
it?
Caesar magazine. He did a magazine called Little Caesar.
Who did, David or
No,
Dennis Cooper? Uh-huh.
It was a literary magazine, and it had a lot of people, probably like we would have had Burroughs.
And that's, I think, how they, I think that's the connection.
And Burroughs lived in some sort of a bunker over near the Lower East Side, you know.
Yeah,
where- So.
It wasn't
David-
Max Blagg that introduced him to Burroughs?
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know either. Yeah. But it's, you know, we were talking a little bit about yesterday about how David changed when he was diagnosed and how he became so sweet.
Oh, no, that was way into his,
Yes,
Yeah.
into his dementia.
yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't, I mean, he was enraged, you know, and I think it was, no, I think that's a hard thing to even, certainly even as a friend, to fathom how do you cope with that you know, and especially because Peter Hoosier, you saw him die, and he knew what was coming, and, you know, there wasn't any, like, thought that wasn't coming, you know, that was a certainty.
Well, you know, it's interesting when Marion Skimama's film, Self-Portrait in 23 Rounds, is going to be showing again at the Whitney. You should get tickets. It's incredible.
I think Hal said they were going to show it here. Is that wrong with that?
No, you're showing something else here.
How's that?
Where's Hal's not here? Hal's showing something else that Marion did. The film is like an hour and a half long. What is it?
She'll be showing films here next Monday, a week from tonight.
But not Self-Portrait in 23 Rounds?
No, that'll be at the Whitney.
That'll be at the Whitney, that's what I thought. But in that, he never says that he's going to die. He's being interviewed by Silver, and he says, he always says, if I die. It was so interesting to me that it was...
I think that's probably the way everyone put it. I mean, very few, I don't know if I don't remember hearing anybody say, when I die. I mean, we were all very young.
Yes.
It was to put the if, but of course, you know, who hadn't died, so barely understood. But it's not something that you could deal with moment by moment. It would be in the back of the mind. And,
Yeah, I mean, it was
Yeah.
interesting because in this film, at some point he says, oh, well, this is, you know, like, you want to come and you want to film me because it's like, here's David laughing, here's David doing this, here's, you know, like all of these things that you can do, that you can then show if I die.
yeah, so we meant, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he felt, I suppose, that he was probably being exploited. I mean, would be exploited. And as everybody is sooner or later. But some sort of a setup. But actually, it was because everybody admired him. I believe his work, and you know.
So, do both of you want to talk a little bit about how you feel that Luis and David influenced each other?
I think that they met through their minds met through their work and not through politics. Luis wasn't an activist at all. Luis knew everything that was going on all the time. It's almost as if he sucked it from the air because he only listened to classical music. I never heard him listening to the news. He never watched TV, but he always knew what was going on. But he in the politically as well as in the art world. But American politics was not on his mind. It was. But so when they got together, and I know when I spent time with David, we usually talked about politics. He had some idea or another, but he didn't when he was with Luis because Luis wasn't interested. He wouldn't put up with it. They would work together, talk about not their work but other people's work, and then it would be in that active painting. David spent a certain amount of time at a studio working with Louise, doing work, his own work. And,
His own work, or
yeah, his own work too. I mean, he was playing around, not so much, but especially when we were on, Louise and I bought a place on Forsyth Street, and it was huge. So a lot of people came there to do bigger pieces, because we had a lot of horse things. We had Rhonda with her piano there.
Oh, really? I
And
didn't
the
know.
glitter and diamonds on it, and as long as people, I was very happy, at least when people were there focusing on their work, but as soon as it turned into something else, didn't bother me too much, but Luis couldn't put up with it. He couldn't handle.
What do you mean by something else?
Well, if they start chattering or not focusing on something, but focusing on the work really, but just chattering, he didn't do well. He worked all the time. Luis worked all the time, either sketching, doing studies. He did a lot of studies very quick. He would, and it was very subjective, very fast. It would flow, and then he would start giving these ideas structure, gritting them out, and ordering them. But I have. All of these are studies for larger paintings, but he had maybe 10 or 20 sketches, or 30 or 40 of each of these, very quick sketches where he worked out the idea worked itself out, he played around with it.
So he did a lot of sketching before.
Yeah, he always sketched, and then he did some watercolors and worked with the color.
Because these, you look at this, and it's so loose. I love this painting.
Yeah, that's what he could do because of his training as an architect and his constant work, his nature. I mean, he was naturally very talented, and he trained himself. He was trained as an architect, and he worked all the time. So his whole body, his whole being, knew how to put a large work from the shoulder or the elbow, just finger.
Wow.
And, yeah, there was a grid behind that was originally, maybe there's one smaller gridded thing like that.
Really?
But yeah, that came from a smaller piece and, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he
Interesting.
worked magic.
It looks so
because
spontaneous and in fact.
It looks totally spontaneous and like it was made by a force of nature, but that's only because, well, he was a force of nature. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's, yeah, very honest and quick and there's nothing pretentious to, contrived about it. Looks like it just happened.
Did you critique each other's work or go visit each other's studios and talk about how the work is progressing or?
No. We would never. I mean, we were separated by an entire floor, so the distance.
I'm sure that didn't happen.
Yes, no, we didn't. We would encourage each other. I'm sure usually say, oh, that's really beautiful, but you wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't give him advice, and he wouldn't give me advice, but we would give each other encouragement. We didn't talk about specifically what we were doing as we were doing it, or, if we had a problem, ask advice of what the solution to this, but not that I remember.
So interesting. I watched something on PBS about, who is it, Bruce Nauman and Susan Rothenberg, that live together. His work is so completely different. Or maybe it was, she came to an art table thing and I asked her about that, and she said, oh, we never talk art at all.
It's very, it's very hard to talk art. I mean, you're an artist, another artist. I mean, we talk a little bit. I mean, I tell you what your work is to me, but
maybe we're older and it doesn't. Definitely, Russell's a great critic. To hear him talk about their work is just fantastic.
Yeah, and yeah, we did. I didn't. I always admired his work, even just by admiring somebody and accepting the work as being really remarkable is all they really need. And look to get a certain amount of inspiration and validation, and he validated my work and I validated his. And yeah. And then
I mean, you definitely have a different palette.
we would have been painting anyway, but it's very nice. I find it easier to paint or to create art when there are people around me who are also artists or creating something, because it's a nice energy that, and that was what was happening in the East Village or in Lower Manhattan for however many years, like 10 years. You had this energy in the air. When I'm out in Minnesota on my farm, I don't have that. And there's a difference. You have people stopping by and looking.
And how about in South Beach? Is there a community there?
There is a community there. I was with Art Center South Florida for a number of years, and I loved it because we were about 30 artists in 2 buildings, and you would go into somebody's studio whenever you wanted. The doors were always open. Take a look at what they were doing and chat a little bit, and it was a family, a community, and it worked really well for me and for most of the people, a lot of people anyway. Because we all need to feel like we're part of some community, and otherwise you end up feeling very lonely and depressed. And there, it made it so easy because your community fix was right there where you worked. It was all right there, so didn't have to go out at night. Everything was. Well, I would work until 2 in the morning. A lot of others would too. So there were always kindred spirits or family around. We would eat and talk and paint and work and work and work. And that worked really well. The art center closed, and well, it didn't close. They sold the building that we were working in, and so now my studio is. I have another studio. I'm very lucky. It's just below my condo in South Beach. So I have it's a basement with a back door and windows, and it's an amazingly rare and unique building for South Beach to have a basement that isn't full of water. So
Yeah,
I
good
can
point.
just go out the back door, down the steps into my studio.
And you never have flooding there?
No, I haven't. The flooding came because of a pipe in the building, not because of the ocean seeping in. We have sandbags in one room, so we're prepared. And sooner or later, I think it's going to happen, but
Wow, that's interesting. This is living in South Beach now, is having sandbags in your basement.
Yeah, and well, I'm 2 blocks from the ocean, and there's a king moon, it's called, from time to time, once every 2 years. It's when the full moon, which is with the high tide, there's something that happens where the tides are extraordinarily high, and then basically everything floods 2 blocks in, all the 4-star hotels and everything else.
Been there.
Nothing is spared. On your side of the island is even worse. I think the bay side is.
Oh no, that's Jane on the bay side. I mean, I've just been there for Miami, stayed on Collins. So.
We've had floods during the
Yes. we have.
Basel too, a couple of years ago.
You think they wouldn't allow it, you know? This is like
Wouldn't allow the
the city of
floods? I
Miami
would
would
think
like during Mark Basel, no floods, no floods allowed.
The thing about Grace was he was very European. He felt like another thing, don't you think? I mean, when you say like about politics, even like, he was.
But he's a very elegant man,
He was
that's for
incredibly
sure.
elegant, yeah.
He
had that kind of-
was, yes, he was very refined. He was refined by nature, and he was a little bit formal, or he could be. I mean, he was formal, but he could also be very informal. Yeah, he was trained, he had a classical training. His mother was an artist, his aunt was an artist, and his sister, who had worked with Museum of Modern Art here, and so she was someone who he admired for that particular slice of her being. And yeah, it came with the family, that Spanish aristocratic. He wasn't arrogant. He was kind and decent and gentle, and he could be hysterical and all the other things, but it didn't happen frequently.
And I mean, how did his family think about him, this aristocratic family think about him moving to the East Village and living in these like kind of crazy neighborhoods?
Well, his aunt, who was the most aristocratic of anyone in the world, came into town when Luis was sick. He was dying. I mean, it was a month before he died. She flew in, they always stayed at the plaza, but she took the bus down to Lower East Side. And this is where they were fearless, and she was 90 with her cane,
Wow.
Really a good shape, though she didn't really need a cane, she just might use it to whack somebody. Yeah, and so, yeah, she came to see Louise. He didn't want to see her. He refused to see her, actually. And I said, you have to, she came here from Buenos Aires. I have to let her in. She has to get in the front door. So she came in and everything was fine. But they accepted him. I mean, as wherever he was, they knew the question was how they felt about him slumming it, right?
Mm.
And I think they knew that he was an artist and if he wanted to slum it, good, and he would be just fine. And yeah, his mother's, you know, he's an artist, and well, when she found it, I don't know, she probably wasn't really scared, but when they weren't severe or mean about him being gay, it didn't matter. They showed just as much love towards him as
And
they
you,
would
right?
toward, yeah, and me. They accepted me as a son, and his two brothers, sisters were the same. You know, it really didn't matter as long as he was okay, as long as he was happy. I mean, they would rather have had him be living in the East Village happily than living on the Upper East Side being miserable with, yeah. It was all about the spirit. They paid attention to this spirit of the person, not so much the pile of gold.
That's wonderful.
That sort of thing.
So, Judy, did you and David critique each other's work?
No, but sometimes, I do remember one time when he was painting, I think it's the Saint Sebastian, and I said, I think you should make that a little redder, and he did. It was really
He did?
at the point of the arrow, I said, I think it used a little red there, and he did it, that was, no, I
Taking full credit.
the whole thing, yeah. No, I think, it wasn't like that, actually, and I think in a way.
I mean, he seems to everything that, I mean, I never went to his studio once when he was at PS1. Other than that, the things just appeared at the gallery. I never saw anything ahead of time. I didn't know what to expect.
Well, what I was going to say before is when you were sort of saying that Luis planned more than David didn't, but after David died and we went through his things, we found there's the dung beetle and there's all the research for the dung beetle. I mean, everything was looked up, everything was, was researched, and there was a rationale for everything, and so it was almost like and I think it was so much like a puzzle. He's piecing all the pieces together, he's collecting all the pieces, the language he's using, and then he kind of, I think there were probably a lot of times that the paintings came out pretty quickly, it wasn't.
But I think, yes, I mean, I think that he collaged that. I mean, a lot of it was like a collage. When you look at his paintings, you see the different elements, and they all have like their own individual story.
And it's like, there's like symbolic things that he used over and over. They stood for things, and then I think he did a lot. Like, I was surprised to see actual images and what he was researching and working from. It was really interesting.
Well, when I first saw Tessa did an evening of film, East Village Film, and I saw David's films for the first time. And that's when I saw a lot of those images that came from Mexico or wherever that were in the paintings. And I'm like, wow, that's where it came from.
Right. He was creating his own, I don't know if it's right, is it your own lexicon or something? I mean, there was a whole set of things that stood for other things.
Yeah, so the symbols, right, as you said, like things that meant something else to him, or they meant more than like the beetle, I don't know, but these are odd creatures.
Well, the dung beetle has this crazy life where it keeps spinning and that's what the dung beetle is, something like it's moving through dung or something. I don't know.
It pushes the dung around and
it's a little bit like Sisyphus or something.
yeah, and then it rolls it,
It pushes the dung around, and then for what purpose?
Get it bigger,
I
I
don't
think.
know,
Yeah.
I suppose because it has to. Well, I think it's probably part of its pantry.
I think it's part of its meaning, though,
Yeah.
the act of taking, like, the ridiculousness and the kind of, so it's gross and ridiculous, but it's also, I guess, the dung beetle's an artist.
Yeah, and it has a very hard shell, you could probably step on it, one and another one, and ride it around. They're hard shell, like a turtle. I didn't use turtles, it's frogs, and David liked to use.
David likes, I mean, there's a lot of insects and stuff in his,
Snake.
yeah.
But I mean, those are, religious.
And ants, I mean, the ants were big. He said the ants were much like humans, and they were the only, they had, ants and bees, I guess, had colonies and,
Right. They have a job.
their job.
Job to do, job description. They don't stray from it.
So is there anything that you, undirected, that you want to say about?
I think it's really great to see Luis's work and to see it in the context of David's, and I think that Luis was a really incredible artist, and I think he gave David, like you were saying about David being a sponge. I mean, I think Luis, what did you say? He was refined. It wasn't like a thing like superficial. That's the way he was. He was
Right.
kind of an elegant person inside, and a very spiritual person. He was
Yeah.
like emphatically not. He was like an aesthete or something. He was not. It wasn't trappings of comfort. But I think how you meet somebody who I think he was unusual in that way, and that David could absorb that quality in his. I think.
And David had issues, as we all did, especially with the Roman Catholic Church or with the Fundamentalist Church. And Luis's family was Roman Catholic and spiritual, but not rigid. His two aunts formed this religious order in Buenos Aires. They had a whole block, which is common. We went to visit, and they were very dynamic, but you felt they weren't rigid either. They were more interested in the spirituality of Christianity, which is the same as the spirituality in any religion. I think it sort of flows if you understand it correctly. And this feeling of spirit Luis always had. It wasn't a Christian spirit or a Jewish spirit or any other spirit. It was just this human spirit that I read through what, one of his explanations of his work was what he liked to get across in his painting was this feeling of the human spirit. It's impossible to put into words, but that's what art is, a communication spirit somehow, or humanity. And David had that spirit too, where he had a deep respect for life and a deep disrespect for people who were not respectful of life, all life.
Good place to start.
Yeah. All right, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Judy,
Man in the back?
Judy, you're a faculty member at Desde, and you teach painting with your students there. And how do you remember David and Luis and the work that you do with upcoming artists? And how do you influence them to look at their art from the 80s and especially now that we have the Whitney show and this show here at this gallery, the show that was at PPOW this summer. How do you promote and give legacy to those two artists?
Well, there's a little anecdote that in 1983, Luis and Russel came with me to Desde, and met with my, I teach drawing at Desde, and they came and met with my drawing class of freshmen in 1983. Stayed in a little apartment, so I do have a couple of students here, and students, they certainly know that I talk a lot about David and Louise, and for example, with Louise, I have a little, I don't know what this catalog is from, it's just a teeny little catalog of the candles. Do you know those paintings?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think what Russell was touching on is really important, because in some ways I think in some ways being an artist is, in my opinion, trying to find something physical in the world, but that speaks to something which is not physical, and that's a really complicated, that's almost impossible, maybe impossible. But the way that it's funny, because I would have never thought that my work, I mean, I think in a way I'm more classical than David, like, oh, that would be probably my hand or whatever. But I thought, so my students who were here today know that I've sort of made a division between things that are accidental, and you were talking about even Louise with the I Ching, and the idea of the accident, so it's the accidental, the emblem, and the illusion. And then I started thinking about David's lexicon and the sense of collage, and how much David always did that. And in some ways he pieces these things together, and the hope is that you're talking about something that is in the spaces in between, or that there's a kind of a place that you can start to articulate what you can't articulate. The pier, though, I think, so more and more I talk about the East Village and artists in the East Village, but the pier, I think, is the most remarkable thing in a way, only because, and so I always show, well, just the images that I have of Louise's are so fantastic in their scale in terms of that space. And like, almost like archaeological, like you don't know what time, this is the feeling of time and ruin and stuff is in those things in a way. But the spirit of, and I think it's true, things are more available, or there are other places where it's available, but the idea of, certainly of working, generating your sort of life around the way that you work, a kind of pleasure in making things, and some kind of a way of making your own little world that you take, control of. So the idea, I guess, sometimes I've shown that image of David and Mike on the grass with the quote from their manifesto of the pier, which was basically, egalitarian. And I think that it was true that there was a limit to the people in a way, whatever. But that idea that you could affect something, and that you could do it yourself, and that quality of that spirit, I think, is something that, for me, in my experience with students now, that they need to have encouraged, because it's so overwhelming and so expensive and so not having that. And, it was sort of corporate, actually. We lived through Reagan in the 80s. Everything has changed. So I think that I think also I'm like that, you know what I mean? Like, I think I convey that to my students by liking making things, and pleasure in the touch, and things that are, I'm always, people here I mean, that's a big, a source of education for me, to people to just see where that really happened, and it was some kind of a powerful thing, and then it's unseparable from AIDS, and so it's such a strange puzzle of the whole thing, and a very, but I think that thing at the pier, and Louise's paintings in the pier, and the feeling of that place, you could feel, it's you see it in the photographs, I think. I mean, I think it's communicated, is really, the power of art, really, I think, like.
And Gracie, you talked about something the other night, mentioning the difference between a space that's gritty and a space that's pristine, and an artist will walk into the space and you work differently. And if you had 5 rooms at the Museum of Modern Art to fill in, or you had the pier, which is gritty and falling apart, the work is going to be different, because you just feel different. You're probably going to be, or a lot of people would be, paint more naturally on this huge scale in a pier, because you wouldn't worry about anything. You couldn't really destroy anything, because it was already there. And so just working in a gritty spot, there probably aren't that many gritty kids now will go into virtual space, which is not very dusty, right? And,
You have to advertise.
and work there, instead of really getting into the smell and the touch and the feel of.
That place was really powerful. I mean, you really were, on every level, walking into that place, the scale of it, and the kind of.
Did you walk in or crawl in?
Yeah, to
It
crawl
was
in.
like
That's right, so you crawl in and then you look at, and then it's very dark, and as you readjust, you see the, is it David Finn? Like the garbage bag people, which really unnerves you because you think that they really feel like real people in that. And I think that it actually.
Those were brilliant, those garbage bag people.
Yeah. But the thing you were saying about going back to David's show, and I think this would be true of Louise too, David is in the pristine space now. And it still carries all the kind of feeling of the thing that is in those paintings.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's really powerful about the show.
Yeah, the piece will carry whatever it is with it, no matter where it is. And it's probably even more exaggerated when it's in a pristine space because of the juxtaposition of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with the piers, first of all, it was amazing to you're an artist in this community of artists and you can go and take a huge wall and just put your statement out there that way. And also that you didn't have to ask permission from anybody. It was completely, from what I understood, open to anybody who wanted. The word got out the way the word got out about everything, and people would just show up.
In general,
It got out
respectful.
really, yeah.
They didn't go on top of other people,
No, people, it was so huge, so people would start working on a wall, and then everyone knew that they couldn't have that wall, but there were 100 other walls, or 100 other spaces,
Right.
so many windows.
I'm like such a scaredy cat. I went there, it's like, I took about 5 steps and I was like, there were big holes in the floor and it was so rickety. It's like, I can't, and I left. When Mike Bidlow did the, at PS1, remember when he did the factory at PS1?
Yeah.
And everybody started dancing and the floor was going, I left them too.
You were probably
I'm out of here.
That's because everybody was on acid.
Yes, that's true, but me, I wasn't, that was the problem, that's why I
That's why you had to leave.
Yeah.
But I looked at the floor and it was there was this much room between the floor and the wall. And the floor was
Oh, really?
yes, yeah.
You sure you wanted
it was true of Fashion Moda too, that it was it seemed like I remember when I met with Stefan Icy, I acted if you're going to make the trek up here, I'm going to give you a show. It wasn't.
Maybe you should explain the context of why the floor was going up and down like that.
Oh,
Because
everybody
The
was
Velvet Underground was playing, and
Right.
David Wojnarowicz was Lou Reed.
Exactly.
And everybody in the audience was on acid.
And Keiko was
Nico.
Nico. And everybody was on acid, and everybody was dancing and carrying. It was such a magic moment.
I wasn't there either.
You weren't there?
No, because I was on my way to RISD to teach at school.
Oh, bummer.
I went there really quickly, but I didn't get to the point of this.
Anything else?
Gracie, I have a follow-up question. Yesterday, and I've been thinking about this for the past 24 hours, you had a wonderful question about survival of a partner who is living with the same situation that you were living with. And I'm wondering for Judy and Russell, how that impacts their lives today as artists, working artists. They're still creating art. They're teaching art to other artists now who will be future artists in this world, and how the fact that survivors of David and Louise took care of them during the prime of the HIV crisis, and how that translates today in today's world, 32 years later.
Now, I'm not quite sure what the question is. Could you put it in, so how, having taken care of Luis in the last year when he was so sick, and then
Continue your artwork, continue your artwork and legacy as an artist yourself.
yeah, well, if I hadn't had my artwork, or if I hadn't had something to focus on completely, I would have been very unhappy. I was already, but that's where a lot of artists go. A lot of people, everybody goes when they want to cheer up, or when something powerfully horrible happens to them, you're lucky if you have something that you love. And you lost something that you love, but there's still something, other things, so you focus on that. And so I focused on my work, and I was always, the important thing is not to cry and cry and cry, but to just say thank you, thank you, thank you. That's what works for me. The gratitude, you have to do that, thank you, rather than, because it is very sad, but there's an awful lot to be grateful for in having known these people and just being alive. Yes, so the impact, I don't know, it was all a positive impact, meeting people. Their death wasn't necessarily a positive impact, but it didn't, it's all part of life, they did it, and they did it well. And
One thing I loved about David, when he was even sick, he said something very sweet to me at one point because I was complaining a little bit and then I felt bad that I was complaining. And he acted like, that's not right. Like like David was a very loving person that way. Like he said, that thing hurts you, but even if, so he had a kind of a way of like that was a very loving thing to have. I was definitely very honored to get to know David and to take care of him. That was a very special thing for me. And I did make some paintings after that I realized were mourning paintings because there is something about...
well, you're working on the series now, Little Portraits of David.
Right. And I think that mourning is, when I think about what I said before about David saying people, the sense of invisibility is a very painful thing. And I think that in some ways too, that the kind of memory of someone, or the remembering of them, the making of them, the face of them, or even other things, and I think obviously, I am involved in kind of a different quality of mourning now, but the ones that were the 90s, like were the ones that were really a lot of Lindsay, that the figures were kind of dissolving as you watch those, I realized after that they were very much a kind of a mourning, and it wasn't just David who died, there was there was a tremendous community of people. And that idea, even of the strikingness of seeing somebody so physically healthy and young, that was, so the kind of, the quality of the physical decay or that kind of thing. So I think that but ultimately extremely inspired by David, and I always felt about, and Louise, so that there was a kind of an integrity for both of them in the work and the quality of what they decided to do and say. Neither of them, and I think this is true, had any kind of what did you say, suffer fools, whatever. Both of them had a quality of having their own, very strong value system of what they cared about. And that was not negotiable. That's a very nice thing, that's really important to meet people who really believe in what they are and believe in them, believe in their beliefs, live by their beliefs, I guess, so. It was inspiring, both were inspiring artists,
Yeah, and they still, for a number of years after Louise died, I also saw a show of David's after he died. I don't know, he'd fall asleep at night and have a dream, and all of the shows were here at Palace Gallery when it was larger. And, a year after Louise died, in my mind, in my dream, come to a show and you'd see all of his new work, and it was work that I'd never seen before, and David's too. So they were clearly affecting my life somehow. But the shows were exquisite, probably the best ever.
I think what Don brought up sort of reminds me of the statement that you can't write lyric poetry after Auschwitz was the original thing. And I think that there must have been at that time, the beginnings, leading up to 1985, was like this grand, Paris between the wars. It was like parties and everybody was for everybody else, and it was such a big communal thing.
Total freedom, no fear. Yeah.
Yeah, no fear, no idea that any of this was going to happen, and every night was something else different. It was such an amazing, creative, vibrant time, and then AIDS hit, and it was getting punched in the stomach, and it's, we continued, but everything changed. I mean, really, everything changed. In 1985, the Fun Gallery closed, and somebody painted on the front of it, "No Mo Fun." And I thought, well, that's true, there is no more fun. I mean, like, how can you have fun? You know, life is not fun anymore. Life is very real. You know, when you're young, you don't think of your friends dying. You know?
And this is not supposed to happen. I mean, not so many of them every day.
Right.
Well, I left New York soon after Louise died and started, didn't start a new life, but I continued my life. I had my community back in Minnesota, with a community that I love, and a community I had been spending time in South Beach because I had a show at the Miami Art Museum and spent a couple months there while I was doing the installation in January and February. Got to know the place, really liked it. So I got a place down there. So I had a place here in New York, and I had Miami. I had fun. It was too much. So I gave up my place here in New York and carried on there. But it was something of a fresh start, but there weren't all these memories. I don't know if I had stayed in the loft where Louise died, it would have, he would have been with me in a different sort of way somehow, because he was no longer there,
Right.
creating the energy that filled the loft.
But it's, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but it was like his drive to create, like you said, he worked constantly, all the time. And so even when he was in his last, when I did that show, his last...
2 days before he died, I mean, he was still doing the type of work that you
Those
showed.
little drawings, yeah, which were very different. His hand was so weak, and
He
they were...
could barely move, and his head was very, very clear. His mind did not deteriorate one bit. He was, it was trapped in the body that wouldn't work. And so somehow he managed to deal with the frustration, but it must have been,
Gracie, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So, first of all, both Judy and Russell, I remember your shows. I remember Civilian Warfare. Russell, I remember your show here when it filled the whole gallery, all the works on plastic.
And I remember your apartment where we used to go at 3 in the morning and wake you up and let's go to James.
But so here's my question. When I would visit the artists in East Village or hang out or whatever we were doing, to me it felt like the total center of the art world. I didn't think there was anything, in terms of young art, I didn't think there was any other scene happening anyplace else that made any difference compared to what was happening here in New York at that time. So what about today? Don and I are still friendly with a lot of young artists. We continue to collect young artists' work. But is there anything happening today that feels the same as what was happening in the East Village, anywhere, LA or Brooklyn, and if not, why not?
I
a lot of that-
wouldn't know if it was that.
I doubt it.
I think you probably know a lot more than any of us know, because you really keep on top of it. But what I see is the whole problem is real estate.
Yeah.
It was, the East Village happened because that's where artists could live cheaply. You could rent, the gallery, our gallery was like, the first, was like $500 a month. I mean, you didn't have to, it was not driven by you had to sell so little to make your nut. And so your decisions on who you're going to show or what you were going to do or the artists, what they were doing, it was just out of pure pleasure. I mean, it was very different. Now artists have to make the decision it's going to be expensive for them. Their studio is going to cost a lot of money. Their, living space is going to cost a lot of money. It becomes a career choice.
But I also think when you mentioned AIDS as the thing that slapped us in the face, I always think of Reagan and AIDS together. And I think that even the kind of desire to have something that wasn't market driven
Right.
changed.
But this was, it was like the perfect storm, whatever the opposite of that is, where you had all of the ingredients right there. All you had to do is throw them together, because you had the inexpensive real estate. You had so many artists who were eager to show and eager to work and eager to, find a space, and you had the collectors. There's so many people in the city who were interested in actually buying artwork. So we had the art, the creativity, the youth, the spaces to show, the art galleries, new art galleries, and the collectors, and everything worked just fine.
But the collectors were the same people who were buying in Soho, because I was friends with Nick Scheide at the time who worked at Sonnabend. So when people would come in that I wouldn't know, like the Rubels, and they would want to buy a whole show and, like all this kind of stuff, and then I would call Nick, do you know these people? He knew all of them. There wasn't like anybody new that was, I guess there were some new people that were created at that time, but.
I still think there will always be people collecting, there will always be places to show art. Yes, the economy has made it more difficult, and the real estate, and having less public space, and everything's become very privatized, so you're narrowed into smaller spaces that you can do things in. Like, you can't even go into the street and shoot a film anymore because the cop will stop you and say, do you have a license?
Right.
That never happened years ago. But I think there's been this whole, and I think the art schools have played a part of it in this whole professionalism of art, in becoming business people and being very smart about things and having to have these ideas fully formed before you could do anything. Whereas I think back then, we just did things. We weren't afraid to take risks. A lot of these kids, the younger generation now, is very self-conscious. They don't feel they can afford to take the risks as much. They expect that to be recognized isn't so much by their community, but by the press and by certain collectors. So everything's aimed at the commodification and hitting certain markets. We never thought about that back then. We were crazy. We didn't do stuff because we wanted the New York Times to review about it. We figured they were like too dumb anyways, and they wouldn't understand it. So we created our own press, and if they didn't, I think the New York Times called us uninterested. Now,
it's more like we did it for each other.
We did it for each other, and we worked against things. We were politically incorrect. We were pushing boundaries. We were able to take risks, and these.
And we were a big we. There were a lot of us, and that's really what made it.
But why do you say we're politically incorrect?
One thing that's changed is the rise of artist-run cooperatives. You have Tiger Strikes Asteroid, or taking the asset. There's a couple here that ran a gallery on Metropolitan Avenue. So that's one big thing that, I remember moving here in the 80s, and there were artist collectors. And then it sort of went away in the 90s, and the aughts, it's come back again.
But were the artist collectors that are developing now, were they really about the artists working for each other, or were they about getting yourself in the media, getting an article in the New York Times, hitting these big collectors who are out there, hobnobbing with museum curators? We didn't care about that.
And we don't care about
making it together.
Yeah, it is.
But
it's not focused in one neighborhood. It's a red hook.
And failing is okay. You do something crazy and like 50 people would see it. And if you failed or it was miserable, it was okay. We talked about it. Maybe it was great. Now you go and you do something. There's hundreds of people. There's the same 50 people shooting on their cell phones, transmitting around the world. So everybody knows what's out there, and before it kind of developed very slowly. So people are much more self-conscious. Even when they do performances, it's all about getting the right photo so that the photo of their performance looks good. Never, I mean, it's a very different attitude.
I think also that because there's so much of that, that it almost cancels each other out. So people can still take those risks because there's so many photos. No one's gonna care about that photo. It's just different.
Yeah, I mean.
But even the definition, I mean, it's the East Village movement. I mean, it says something that, was big enough to be defined like that.
It was small enough to be defined.
Or
like that.
small enough but big enough, important enough. And so it was a movement, and we were also moving together, which was, it wasn't control, it was organic. I mean, it just happened. We were all on the same wavelength somehow, and nobody, imagine something like that being forced to happen, or the concept, oh, let's do that, and that East Village thing over there. And it doesn't happen that way. It was totally
I think the
organic.
art world's gotten
Everything was
so
right.
big. I think it's just gotten so big, and technology obviously, has just changed everything. So we're so global, but I think Sarah's right that it's like getting the right picture and getting the right collectors. It's the right being in the right shows. But for me, when I think about my question, when I think about PS1 then and PS1 today, I think that kind of defines the whole difference of how it was. It was so, for us, experimental. You could do whatever you want. Mike's performances and the fun things that he did, and it was new and unusual
And artists had studios there.
right, artists had studios there, and now it's part of MoMA, which is okay, and what they're doing is pretty cool, but that I think
Corporate.
really is the
Corporate.
it is corporate.
Right, you won't see the floor bouncing up and down the PS1 again.
Well, I had a professor tell me that his students say things to him like some gallery, some mid-level gallery, or even like a Lower East Side gallery or a mid-level gallery will offer them a show, and they'll say no because they think it will hurt their chances of getting to David's Werner, which is where they all want to be and want to figure out how, and if they show at that gallery, that'll be it. They'll never make that jump. How?
One of the things that was developing in the early 80s that was rather hidden, but has come to fruition big time, is the commodification of art through art investment advisory services.
Yeah.
And if you think back to the early 80s, or even late 70s, when we started this gallery in 75, we didn't have hordes of art advisors telling people what to buy. The collectors who were interesting were people who knew what they wanted to buy. They didn't need someone to tell them what to buy. They went out and they went to galleries. I mean, Rubels were a good example of that. John and Vera, I remember way back in the 70s, they made it a point to see every show they could. And at the same time, people like Jeffrey Dutch, who was working for Citibank, started the Art Investment Advisory Service. Well, today, art is a huge commodity, and people store art offshore in safe warehouses. I mean, there's a huge scandal going on with the Russian and the French art dealer, who, you've read about it, there are billions of dollars being argued about. But this has changed the landscape incredibly. And the other thing that's come along with that is art fairs. And art fairs are big business for the people who run art fairs. They're sort of good business sometimes for galleries and dealers, but they're really good business for people who run the art fairs. And those have changed the landscape also. Today, people don't go to galleries the way the Rubels did in the 70s. They go to an art fair and they figure in a couple of hours they can see 300 galleries and catch up on everything. That's not seeing art, that's seeing merchandise.
Right.
You're looking at merchandise in the way that you would go to an auto show and look at automobiles or
I
tires.
think you're looking at merchandise, you're looking at a brand. You're
Yeah,
looking
and
at-
this is a factor that we all have to understand and accept. I mean, it's a reality, it's not gonna change tomorrow. But this is part of what has impacted what goes on with art in a huge way. And it kind of crept along quietly until the early 90s, and then it took off big time.
Yeah, Art Basel, when Art
Yeah.
Basel started.
But I think
But I think that it really changed. I mean, it used to be that artists would work for 2 years to put together a show. They would get a show every 2 years in a gallery. And when you would go, you would see what was in that art, what went through that artist's head over those 2 years. And there would be developing something, and you would need to see the whole show to really understand. Now, you see one piece in a booth with everybody else's things. And the artists have to, I don't know whether they do, but I think maybe they think in terms of what's going to make my piece stand out? How's my piece going to be the one that's going to get a lot of notice when somebody walks into
A
a
lot of
booth?
Instagram shots.
Yeah, and also like galleries told me, a gallery told me, which I thought was, I never thought of this, I thought it was interesting, like why, that they have to do art fairs, first of all, for the artists, not just, I always thought I would have to do the art fairs in order to keep the artists, that they show, because if they don't do art fairs, they'll go to a gallery that does do art fairs. But no, they said to me they have to do art fairs because if an artist is really in demand, you can't get any work from them. But if you say, I need a piece for Miami Basel, all of a sudden, a piece will appear. So,
But to me, to answer Jane's question, I hope that that somewhere in another space, something like that is happening, and maybe it's,
we're too old. I mean, I'm sure it is happening. We don't even know about it.
There's small parts of it. There's
Yeah,
small parts of it.
It's just not the same thing. I mean, Donna and I go to do studio visits in Brooklyn, and we go to the most run-down, decrepit buildings you could possibly imagine. And I am surprised that the floor doesn't crash. And, the wiring is all over the place, and there's
Nowhere.
junk everywhere, and
Nowhere.
it's so hot you can't possibly breathe. And the artists are saying, I'm lucky I can afford this place. So you're right about real estate. The cost of real estate is so high for artists. They're so spread out, and they're working in these really bad conditions, but there are pockets of them all over the place. Wherever we go, whether it's in Miami, or we were in the Hamptons, or Brooklyn, or I guess Detroit or Chicago or the different parts of LA. I think there are pockets of it. The thing that happened in the East Village, I don't think can ever possibly happen again. There's, as you say, this kind of organic, natural coming together of dozens and dozens of people in which you had everything. You had artists, dealers, collectors, curators, everybody coming in and getting together and agreeing that something great, something creative was going on there. I don't think that could happen again
There's also
in
more
one
physical
place.
contact. We had to
You
call
had to go
someone,
there.
you had to go to a
Slides.
place
You had
and
to
find
send your
someone, you had to
slides.
talk to someone, you had to walk into a gallery and have something. Everything now is done, so much of it is done through the internet and it's interpersonal sort
Oh,
of
I
thing.
just upset an art dealer in LA because I told him I don't buy art from JPEGs. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I want to see it. Anyway, I'm done talking.
I know, that's great.
I think the question then becomes like, what is a way of fostering that? I run NYC Crit Club, which brings artists and galleries together across the city. And we have guest critics come, it's kind of like school, but for people in New York who aren't going to grad school right now or have already gone to grad school and still want advice. But I think one thing I want it to be is more like this open thing that was happening, and I want it to be like that. Is there a way of bringing that back?
I think that what the key was for that time, it wasn't planned. I mean, it's not like, how did we do that? It's like, it did. It just happened. And that was part of the magic. Like people say, oh, you're so genius, you did this show in your bathroom and you got all this press. Well, it was great that I got all the press, but we were doing shows like that all the time. We did a show, sir, we did a show in your bathroom. Do you remember? Like, your bathroom on St. Mark's Place was, you had to go out, well,
Really
but then you broke a hole in the wall, so you entered through your bathroom? I can remember you did a show there one time. We did a show.
We hung art there, we hung art.
Yeah, it wasn't a show, but mine wasn't a show either. It was one night. It was like, I did a fake press release and it was like a one-night event. It said it was open for 30 days. I did a letterhead. It was all part of like a conceptual thing. And it said it was 30 days, but then it was like the opening and the rest of the month by appointment. I mean, I lived there. It was like a joke. So it was, maybe a little bit more formalized than the thing we did at your bathroom.
Yeah.
But remember, we did this show, Sarah and I worked at this place, Hilton Fine Arts. It was on Spring and West Broadway, and there were display windows on West Broadway. And so to get to the display windows, there was a narrow hallway to behind where those display windows are. So we were like, let's do a show here. And we put nails in the wall and put like coat hangers and clipped the artwork, and you had to like go in sideways, to like see this stuff with a flashlight.
Just to make things interesting and to have fun for ourselves and to meet other artists. And it really wasn't about the market. Yes, we'd like to find people who would buy stuff, and we sold stuff for like incredibly cheap, and when we sold something, it was like, wow, this is really exciting for $200. I mean, that doesn't cut it anymore. I talk to these young artists, and they tell me what they want for their work, and I'm saying, like, really? Like, why? I mean,
I have this, when David did his retrospective at Normal, Illinois, I have a video of him walking through the whole show. And I used to show it to my students.
I'd love to
submit. It's unedited too, because Steve Bromm was supposed to edit it, but it's in VCR, whatever. But anyway, David talks about being, you have to get it digitized. David talks about being an outsider, and I started to, I would show it to my students, and there was a point in time, I'm not sure what year I would say it was, where the idea of being the outsider was just a strange idea, whereas to me, I always thought of myself as being an outsider, and David did, and I think we all did in a way. It was poking fun at the thing and making it your own thing. It wasn't like, and I think that, but as far as, Hillary, your question, it's like, I guess, like you are doing amazing things, and you are making community and bringing things together. I think it's just, it was like a little TV pocket. It didn't last forever.
Well, also, I mean, New York was very different then. I think the East Village attracted people who were uncomfortable living wherever they were living, and they were like,
They were others.
They were others. And
Others,
they sort of
and they were
tolerated lots of,
brave.
I mean, there were artists, but there were also incredible performance people, and there were, the Angels of Light and
We
the,
were close to our drug supply.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. Drugs thing had a big thing to do with it, and eating cheap food had a lot to do with it, and having a cheap apartment.
Jane is here, and I remember Charlie talking about how there was just like a truck that pulled up at one point, and there were like some movie cameras on the truck or something, and that was like...
That's how people started
make
doing
a movie. They could start, that was an available thing. It was lawless anyway in New York. New York was also very different. It was a lot of room for not...
Yeah, you could shoot a gun in Tompkins Square Park and no one would care. Try that today.
Jim.
Well, I feel, I have to a little bit. I just want to say that first, we caught a wave, and we didn't even know it, but first of all, we were a wave. We were the baby boomers. There were a ton of us. We had ended the Vietnam War. We thought we could do anything. And we came to New York, and New York was bankrupt. All the people who were in power had moved to Westchester or Connecticut, and nobody in power cared what happened in New York. So when I first was with Charlie, he was shooting a movie, and he's like, okay, we shot this scene in front of One Police Plaza. He said, just go put some saran wrap on the bumper of that police car, and then there was a little black kid, this big. He goes, here, now you go spray paint the car. And there's these cops walking by, and they were like, what are you doing to Joe's car, And then they just kept going, because they figured you couldn't possibly be in front of One Police Plaza spray painting the car unless you had permission, which, of course, we didn't. But, today, you would be beaten to death if you tried that. Or shot, or both, and your whole family would be thrown in jail. And, I mean, the consequence. So we came into a city that nobody, the police didn't care, nobody cared, everything was very cheap. So we felt like, well, let's try this, let's try that, you know.
They let us have an opening at the Spring Street at the pier before they closed it down. I mean, that, I just can't believe they let all those people in there and that was not gonna be that was something.
Death trap.
Yeah, a death trap, like guess what?
But, you know, also like 1980 was the highest point in crime in New York City. We were bankrupt. We almost went bankrupt. And then the government said, I forget who was the president then. They basically
Drop
said,
dead.
Screw you.
drop dead. New York City dropped dead. Who was it?
Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford. But then then somebody said, whoa, you can't let New York City go bankrupt. And then they did, some money did come in, but New York City almost went bankrupt.
Well, you know, you could, I mean, in a conspiratorial way, I think that's like a great power grab at the end of that, because I think you're right, it's just about power. They made the vacuum, and then they came in and bought everything and made it, because that's certainly different from what it is now.
Yeah,
It's like
I mean,
venture capital.
pardon?
It's the way venture capital works.
Right. I mean, I look at,
Kill it, and then you,
well, I went to a viewing of Downtown 81, which is this great film that was done when Jean-Michel had not such a big star yet, but obviously Glenn O'Brien knew that he was going to be, and he's the star in this film, and it all takes place in the East Village in 1981, and you see the East Village in 1981 was rubble. I mean, there were blocks when there was nothing but like piles of bricks and like maybe a facade of a building and nothing behind. I mean, it was unbelievable. And these kids watched it and they said, wow, I can't believe the South Bronx looked like that then. I said, no, it's the East Village. I mean, all those blocks are now all built up. There's all new construction, you know. The landlords burnt all those buildings down because they couldn't pay the taxes.
Well, one of the reasons there's so much development in the East Village is because there were so many empty lots.
Right. Yeah.
They were turned into gardens and then they were destroyed.
Right.
so that's why it's difficult to do now, because.
That's a good answer.
Detroit.
But I think I remember Louise as being a little bit older, you know, it's like, we were very young, I mean, it was a young group of young, I mean, I think you had to be young in a way, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but Arnold Meshes wasn't young.
Al Hansen wasn't young. I mean, I think that was also the great thing about the East Village. I mean, you didn't have to, you didn't have to, because a lot of people were young, but a lot of people weren't.
Right.
Or a number of people weren't.
It was much more intergenerational.
So I think
Intergenerational.
Time
is up. Sorry to be so abrupt. Unless anybody has anything else to say, I think we're going to say thank you.
Thank you.